Hello, everyone. I am Horror Horizon, and I'm here to help you today. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments where you're from and what time you're watching right now. Get comfortable, relax, and let's dive into a story that might just keep you awake tonight. If you have any horror stories that have happened to you, please email us. It was past midnight when Sarah and Mark finally pulled into the parking lot of the roadside motel. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked asphalt. The place looked like it had seen better days, peeling paint, overgrown weeds, and a general air of neglect. But after 12 hours on the road, they were too exhausted to care. All they wanted was a bed and a few hours of sleep before continuing their journey. The clerk at the front desk was a gaunt man with hollow eyes and a monotone voice. He handed them the key to room 112 without a word, his gaze lingering just a little too long on Sarah. She shuddered, brushing off the feeling as fatigue. The room was exactly what they expected, a sagging bed, a flickering lamp, and a faint smell of mildew. But it was clean enough, and they were too tired to complain. Sarah fell asleep almost immediately, but Mark lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling. The motel was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy and oppressive. Just as he was about to drift off, he heard it, a faint knocking on the wall behind the bed. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder and more insistent. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" He nodded, sitting up in bed. The knocking was coming from the other side of the wall, in the adjacent room. It sounded frantic, like someone was desperately trying to get their attention. Sarah clutched Mark's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Maybe it's just someone next door," Mark said, though he didn't sound convinced. "I'll go check." He grabbed the room key and stepped out into the cold night air. The motel courtyard was deserted, the only sound the hum of the flickering neon sign. He walked to the front desk, where the same clerk sat, staring blankly at an old television. "Hey," Mark said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's someone knocking on the wall in our room. Can you tell them to keep it down?" The clerk turned to him slowly, his expression unreadable. "Room 112, right?" "Yeah." "That's impossible," the clerk said flatly. "The room next to yours, 114, has been locked for weeks. No one's staying there." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you sure?" "Because someone is definitely knocking." The clerk shrugged. "I can check if you want, but I'm telling you, no one's there." Mark followed the clerk to room 114. The door was locked, just as he had said. The clerk unlocked it and pushed it open, revealing a dark, empty room. The air inside was stale and cold, and the bed was neatly made, untouched. There was no sign of anyone. "See," the clerk said. "No one here." Mark returned to their room, his mind racing. Sarah was sitting on the bed, her face pale. "What did they say?" "No one's next door," Mark said, trying to sound reassuring. Maybe it was just the pipes or something. But the knocking had stopped, and the room was eerily silent. They tried to go back to sleep, but neither of them could shake the feeling of unease. The silence was worse than the knocking, heavy and suffocating. The next morning, Sarah woke up to a foul smell. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger as the minutes passed. It was coming from the wall, the same wall where they had heard the knocking. "Mark," she said, gagging. "Do you smell that?" He nodded, his face grim. They called the front desk, and the clerk reluctantly sent a maintenance worker to investigate. The man arrived with a toolbox and a look of annoyance, but his expression changed as soon as he entered the room. "That's not right," he muttered, sniffing the air. He tapped on the wall, listening carefully. Then, without a word, he left and returned with a crowbar. Sarah and Mark watched in horrified silence as the maintenance worker pried open a section of the wall. The smell hit them like a wave, and Sarah covered her mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. Inside the wall, hidden behind the drywall, was the decomposing body of a man. His face was frozen in a mask of terror, his hands pressed against the wall as if he had been trying to escape. The police were called, and the motel was thrown into chaos. The man was identified as a missing person who had disappeared months earlier. No one could explain how he had ended up trapped inside the wall, but the coroner estimated that he had been dead for at least 2 months. As Sarah and Mark packed their bags to leave, the clerk approached them, his face pale and drawn. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying. The way he had looked at her when they checked in, the way he had insisted the room was empty, it all felt wrong. As they drove away from the motel, she couldn't stop thinking about the knocking. It had been frantic, desperate, as if the man had been trying to warn them. And then there was the question that haunted her the most: if the man had been dead for months, who, or what, had been knocking on the wall? It was past midnight when Emily pulled into the parking lot of the Sunset Inn, a budget motel on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow over the cracked asphalt. She had been driving for hours, her eyes heavy and her body aching from the long work trip. The motel was the only place she could find open at this hour, and though it gave her an uneasy feeling, she had no other choice. The lobby was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of stale cigarettes and mildew. The clerk, a gaunt man with hollow eyes, handed her a key without a word, his gaze lingering just a little too long. Emily forced a polite smile, took the key, and hurried to her room. Room 13. Of course. The hallway was silent, save for the faint hum of a vending machine at the far end. The carpet was stained and damp under her shoes, and the flickering fluorescent light above her door made her pulse quicken. She hesitated before sliding the key into the lock, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. The room was exactly what she expected: a sagging bed, a dusty TV, and a faint smell of bleach that didn't quite mask the underlying odor of decay. Emily dropped her bag by the door and immediately began her routine, something she always did when staying in unfamiliar places. She checked the closet first, pulling open the creaky doors to reveal empty hangers and a few stray coat buttons scattered on the floor. Next, she knelt down and peered under the bed, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing but dust bunnies and a lone sock. Satisfied, she locked the door, propped a chair under the handle for good measure, and climbed into bed. The sheets were stiff and smelled faintly of detergent, but she was too tired to care. She turned off the lamp and let the exhaustion wash over her. Emily wasn't sure what woke her. Maybe it was the faint creak of the floorboards, or the subtle shift in the air. She lay still, her heart pounding, straining to hear over the sound of her own breathing. The room was pitch black, the kind of darkness that felt heavy and suffocating. Then she felt it. Something brushed against her hand, which was hanging off the side of the bed. It was light, almost imperceptible, like the touch of a spider's leg. She froze, her mind racing. "It's just a bug," she told herself. "Or a rat. Just a rat." She held her breath, waiting for it to happen again. It did. This time, the touch was firmer, more deliberate. Emily's stomach dropped as the realization hit her: it wasn't a bug or a rat. It was a hand. A human hand, cold and clammy, gripping hers with a strength that made her blood run cold. She screamed, yanking her hand away and scrambling to the far side of the bed. Her fingers fumbled for the lamp, and when the light finally clicked on, she wished it hadn't. There, under the bed, was a man. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes wide and unblinking. A sinister grin spread across his lips as he stared up at her, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Emily's scream caught in her throat, her body paralyzed with fear. He began to crawl out from under the bed, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the moment. That was enough to break the spell. Emily leaped off the bed, her legs trembling as she bolted for the door. The chair she had propped under the handle clattered to the floor as she yanked it open, not daring to look back. She ran down the hallway, her bare feet slapping against the damp carpet, and burst into the lobby. The clerk looked up, startled, as Emily slammed her hands on the counter. "There's someone in my room," she gasped, her voice shaking. "Under the bed. Call the police." The clerk's expression didn't change. He picked up the phone with deliberate slowness, his eyes never leaving hers. Emily glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the man standing in the doorway. But the hallway was empty. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the room thoroughly, but the man was gone. The only evidence he had ever been there was a faint indentation in the carpet under the bed and the lingering smell of sweat and decay. Emily sat in the lobby, wrapped in a blanket, as the officers questioned her. She told them everything, her voice trembling as she described the man's face, his grin, his cold, clammy hand. The clerk, who had remained eerily calm throughout the ordeal, finally spoke up. "Room 13, he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We've had complaints before. People say they see things. Hear things. But no one's ever found anything." Emily stared at him, her stomach churning. "What do you mean, no one's ever found anything?" The clerk shrugged. "Just what I said. Folks check in, they get spooked, but there's never any proof. Maybe it's just in their heads." But Emily knew what she had felt. What she had seen. It wasn't in her head. The police left after taking her statement, advising her to find another place to stay for the night. Emily didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her bag and drove to the nearest 24-hour diner, where she sat in a well-lit booth, clutching a cup of coffee, until the sun came up. She never stayed in a motel again. Years later, Emily still couldn't shake the memory of that night. She often wondered about the man under the bed, who he was, how he had gotten there, and why no one had ever found him. But some questions, she knew, were better left unanswered. All she could do was be grateful she had escaped with her life. And yet, sometimes, when she was alone in the dark, she would feel a faint brush against her hand, and she would wonder if he was still out there, waiting. The rain hammered against the windshield as the Thompson family's car crawled along the deserted highway. The storm had come out of nowhere, reducing visibility to near zero. Mr. Thompson squinted through the downpour, gripping the steering wheel tightly. His wife, Sarah, glanced at the GPS on her phone and sighed. "The next town is still 50 miles away. We're not going to make it in this weather." In the back seat, their two teenage daughters, Emily and Claire, were half asleep, their headphones drowning out the sound of the storm. Emily, the older of the two, stirred and peered out the window. "Dad, there's a motel up ahead," she said, pointing to a flickering neon sign that read Restwell Motel, vacancy. Mr. Thompson hesitated. The motel looked like something out of a horror movie, its paint peeling, the sign buzzing erratically, and the parking lot eerily empty. But the storm left them no choice. He pulled into the lot, and the family hurried inside, drenched and exhausted. The lobby was dimly lit, with a musty smell that made Claire wrinkle her nose. The clerk, an elderly man with a tired expression, barely looked up as he handed them 2 keys. Rooms 12 and 13. Right next to each other. Checkouts at 11. The parents took room 12, while Emily and Claire were assigned room 13. The girls dragged their suitcases inside, the door creaking loudly as it shut behind them. The room was small and dated, with floral wallpaper that had started to peel at the corners. A large, ornate mirror hung above the dresser, its surface slightly cloudy with age. "This place gives me the creeps," Claire muttered, dropping her bag on one of the twin beds. "It's just for one night," Emily replied, though she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. The storm raged outside as the girls got ready for bed. Claire brushed her teeth in the tiny bathroom, while Emily sat on her bed, scrolling through her phone. The Wi-Fi was spotty, and the TV only picked up static, so they decided to turn in early. Around 2 a.m., Emily woke up to the sound of soft humming. She blinked groggily, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. The room was quiet except for the faint patter of rain on the window. She was about to roll over and go back to sleep when she noticed Claire standing in front of the mirror. "Claire," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse with sleep. Her sister didn't respond. She just stood there, brushing her long hair with slow, deliberate strokes. The humming grew louder, a haunting melody that sent a chill down Emily's spine. "Claire, what are you doing?" Emily sat up, her heart pounding. Still, Claire didn't answer. Annoyed and now a little scared, Emily swung her legs over the side of the bed and walked over to her sister. She reached out to tap Claire on the shoulder, and froze. Claire wasn't there. Emily's hand passed through empty air. She spun around and saw Claire fast asleep in her bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. Confused and terrified, Emily turned back to the mirror. Her breath caught in her throat. Reflected in the glass was a woman Emily had never seen before. She was dressed in an old-fashioned nightgown, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, and her lips curled into a faint, unsettling smile. The woman's hand moved as if she were brushing her hair, but there was no brush in her hand, only the motion. Emily stumbled backward, her scream lodged in her throat. The woman in the mirror tilted her head, her smile widening, before she slowly faded away, leaving only Emily's reflection staring back in wide-eyed horror. "Claire." Emily finally found her voice, shaking her sister awake. "We need to get out of here, now." The girls grabbed their things and bolted to their parents' room, their pounding on the door waking Mr. and Mrs. Thompson. After a frantic explanation, the family decided to leave immediately, despite the storm. They checked out in the middle of the night, the clerk barely reacting as they handed over the keys. The next morning, the storm had passed, and the Thompsons stopped at a diner for breakfast. Still shaken, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the mirror. On a whim, she searched online for information about the Restwell Motel. What she found made her blood run cold. Decades ago, the building had been a boarding house. A woman named Eleanor Grayson had lived there, known for her beauty and vanity. She spent hours each day brushing her long hair in front of the mirror. One night, she disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her body was never found, but rumors swirled that she had died in her room. The boarding house was eventually converted into a motel, and over the years, guests reported strange occurrences, whispers in the night, the sound of brushing, and glimpses of a woman in the mirror. Emily showed the article to her family, her hands trembling. They sat in silence, the weight of what they had experienced settling over them. None of them would ever forget the Restwell Motel, or the woman who still lingered in room 13, forever brushing her hair in the mirror. Thank you so much for watching. If this story sent chills down your spine or made you believe in the unseen, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Let us know in the comments, do you believe in spirits, or do you think there's a logical explanation for these hauntings? Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next spine-tingling story. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes, the past never truly stays buried. Thanks for being part of our journey. See you in the next video.